Okay, we're recording. So because of last week, we're a little bit behind where we should be. We've got to finish this. This was supposed to be done last week, and then we're supposed to get into basically the causes of the Civil War. So there's a causes of the Civil War form that I'm going to have you do. I just haven't decided when I'm going to do it yet. It all depends on this. So, well, how I've broken this up, and let me just make sure everybody's got what they. Yeah, you'll need a more clean sheet of paper that's you can take several pages of notes on. Okay, good. We got the terms, and the terms will be up here as well. But um, um, here's how this is structured: abolitionism. Q handles Messiah. You know the Hallelujah chorus. Hallelujah. Hallelujah. No. So we're going to look at two perspectives here: the abolitionist perspective and then the Southern politician's perspective. Note, please, up to this point, I haven't talked about like percentages of people who are really like foaming at the mouth, protection of slavery kind of people, or abolitionists that are the same, just on the opposite spectrum. They're that radical. I would say that just like in today's society, the percentage of people who are real jerks is low, but they have loud voices and they tend to get listened to more. And so, even on the abolitionist side, there's a small percentage of people who really care, but we study them because the effects that this small group had because of their loud voice, um, changed the course of history. The same thing for the slave owners. I would say most people in the South didn't have slaves. Now, that's a fact. But a lot of them wanted to protect slavery because they thought, that's our goal. Eventually, we'll be rich enough to have our own slaves, and so they wanted to protect it. But I do think that Civil War a lot of times comes from people from the neither side being willing to listen to each other, so and calling each other names. So we'll see some of that here. Okay, Quaker reform. What I have on the board is all that I'm really going to say, unless you want me to elaborate on something else. I am not requiring you to write down every single thing here, but it might be a good idea to get the gist of each bullet point for the purposes of your quiz scores that you'll have. So if you want to trace the history of abolitionism, you've got to look at right after the Revolutionary War, and we've talked about this before, but I'll just remind you again. During and immediately after the Revolution, it's the Quakers, definitely a minority of in the religious community. But because of the political power they have in Pennsylvania, of all places, they definitely have some effects. And so they began working for abolition right after the Revolution. Almost exclusively, we're talking about northern efforts by Quakers in northern states. I'm not even really sure if there is a large percentage of southern Quakers, because William Penn's Quaker colony was Pennsylvania, and that's in the north, right? Um, Other denominations like the Northern Methodist and the Northern Baptists start to follow suit in their denominations to work for abolition, not just freely giving up a slave that you might have, but working for laws to keep it from keeping slavery on the books. So we got to start with the Quakers. Then we get to, over time, for the next 55 years, in northern states, we get gradual emancipation laws. Over time, it's not like 1776, July 5th, 1776, every single northern state decides they're going to abolish slavery like that. It takes time. Massachusetts leads the way with the actual state court abolishing slavery. And then after that, it kind of opens up the floodgates. If by floodgates I mean, a couple generations, within a generation, most northern states have abolished slavery. Yes, it does take time. It's not completely finished until the 1840s, but by the time we get to the Civil War, there's definitely a northern free states, southern slave states divide, where there's no slaves allowed in northern areas. And it's gradual because you see in that last bullet point, they recognize that property rights are important and that the state shouldn't be able to take away your property just like that. So it's gradual emancipation means something like the slaves you have now do not have to be freed, but their children have to be, when they're born, they're free. If you got a hand cramp already, then you're gonna have to. Oof, man, I've spoiled you all with fill in the blank notes.
You miss those.
Yeah, yeah, he'll probably get it after this. Unfortunately, I've been giving you the option the last couple times if you want to write your own, because that's how I learned best, was by writing down everything the teacher said. For some reason, that process of listening and writing at the same time really helped it stick in my brain. But it is what it is. Now, I hope that maybe some of you are thinking right now, if you're paying attention to what I'm saying and not just trying to go through the motions of getting something down on the page, Mr. Beavers, that's a little bit kind of awful, isn't it? Respecting property rights. What do we mean by property? What, you say slaves? Yeah, a slave is like this property. Emily Buckley. I'm showing my finger puppet, my Captain America finger puppet, like that kind of property, like my fidget spinner, that kind of property. A slave is a two-word term. It's also the same thing you are. A human being. That you're protecting somebody's property rights, which means you're protecting somebody's right to own a human being. Even in northern states, they're saying we're not going to immediately emancipate. We're going to gradually emancipate, so you don't have to free that person that you have in shackles right now. I know that's but sometimes you got to deal with what you can deal with in the moment. Now, southern states, there were no abolition laws in southern states. There were instead manumission laws, which allowed people to give up their slaves of their own free will, to free their slave from slavery, so that the one day the enslaved person is enslaved and the next day they're not, and no one else can own them. I hope you're noticing the implication here. The implication is that in a lot of southern states besides Virginia, you were not allowed of your own accord to free slaves. If you didn't want a slave anymore, then fine, but you don't have the right to set them free. You can only sell them. But you can see in Virginia there was a manumission law, and manumission means I'm freely allowed to give up my slaves and set them free. They're no longer enslaved at all. And within a decade, 10,000 slaves had been freed in Virginia. Not all. That's by no means a majority, but there were some. And there are pockets of free black communities that are sprouting up in southern areas. So to manumit is not to abolish, it's to, of your own choice, set your slave free. Now, here's a lot of things in here. Again, you need to, and look, I'm not going to tell you that, oh, you don't have to write this. Why don't you practice the art of summarizing without writing everything down? And I'll give you a minute to do that, and then I'll try to explain some of the high points. The goal is by the end of this that you'll be able to tell me what was the American Colonization Society. Nothing else. So the American Colonization Society was founded in 1817. The president at the time was James Monroe. James Monroe had nothing to do with this, but I'm just letting you know that because it's going to come up in just a second. So their goal was to treat black Americans humanely. The problem is, what does it mean to treat them humanely? Well, one thing, of course, is to have them freed, but is it humane to get a person who's enslaved free, and then that's it. And what kind of job skills does that former enslaved person have? Picking cotton. If you lived on Thomas Jefferson's farm, there were some that made nails. Right? You're very limited in the stuff that you can do, and in the number of people who want to hire you. You haven't been taught education. In fact, it's been illegal in a lot of southern states to teach you to read and write. So is it really humane just to say you're free? See you later. No, and maybe not. And then if they live in the same community where they had been enslaved, are they going to be treated equally? Probably not. Almost certainly not. So these people, and I know that this sounds like a very bad idea to us today, but they said the most humane way to deal with people who have been freed from slavery is to send them to Africa, to go back to where their ancestors came from. Now, what's the problem with this? What's that? Yeah, they've never been there before. They don't speak the language. They probably can't even point to it on a map. Can you point to where Liberia is on a map? Could you? You can't? Oh,
I know what continent it's
okay. What continent is it on? Look at
on. West
that.
Africa to be specific.
West Africa. Good.
You know,
Liberia, set up by the communities of the countries of Europe, basically, to be a haven for freed black people from around the world. Specifically, are you laughing about people being freed from slavery? Because that's really,
about the fact that Google Maps says directions.
if you got a good swim.
Wait, I have a question.
Okay,
So wait, Liberia itself was founded for like this,
for this very purpose,
and that's what's called Liberia, 'cause, like
right?
it's like liberty.
Liberty, right? Yes. Now, just so you know, just to make maybe connections to from your past learning, during the era of imperialism in Africa, there was only two countries that were free from imperialism, and that was Liberia and Ethiopia. The rest were carved up by the British and the French and the Germans and the Italians and so on and so forth. Although Ethiopia was taken over during World War II by um, Mussolini, so Liberia was the only one. And notice the name of the capital city, Monrovia, named after who? James Monroe, the president, who had nothing to do with the founding of it, but still he was president when that happened. So Henry Clay was a member of this society. Don't think that this is the last time you'll hear about these things. If I do my job right, if I have time to talk about it, I'll just tell you now. Like Abraham Lincoln, like brings in when he gets into the presidency, you know, 30, 45 years later, he asked a group of freed black leaders, we'll pay for you all to go back to Africa. And they're like, no, no thanks. It's a bad idea because we aren't African, we're American. So anyway, the conservative reformers then are basically the ones I've been talking about so far. They advocate for things like letting freed blacks go back to Africa, quote unquote back. They argue for gradual emancipation over time, not immediate, and compensated emancipation, that the state government will pay you to free your slave, to compensate you for your losses. Which again means we're going to pay you to do something that you should have done a long time ago because you shouldn't own a human. Of course, that also goes with today's form of slavery that's all around the world, sex trafficking slavery. But I don't want to digress into other things. But there's a lot of parallels, including a lot of people who don't care. either way, just like a lot of people didn't care either way during this time period. Okay, now we're going to start talking about the more radical abolitionists now. This society, the American Anti-Slave Society, will be one of those places where that'll just spit out a whole bunch of people that are noteworthy in history. Emily Buckley, just in case it's not clear, I'm having them write these out. In theory, they're supposed to be writing down shorthand notes, but I have a feeling that they're all writing out every single word. Is that right? You're all writing out every single word?
I'm making like 5 words.
Oof.
It's
I wonder it's taking so long. It's okay. It's okay. But because that's what I did. But the name that you need to know on this slide is William Lloyd Garrison. He's one of the founders of the American Anti-Slavery Society. We'll have an entire slide devoted to him. But there's others that on here that their names will come up later. Theodore Dwight Weld, financed by Arthur and Lewis Tappan, the Tappan brothers. The only reason you should know the Tappan brothers' name is that they are the big money backers to these radical abolitionists. They're like the George Soros of today. Do you even know who I'm talking about when I say George Soros? You ever heard of him? He's like Fox News is like they think he's like the Antichrist. Not really, but they like say he's like this really rich media guy who gives all sorts of money to Democratic and liberal causes. They're also like the Koch brothers. If I say Koch brothers, do you know who I'm talking about? Koch, Koch brothers. They're the people the liberals love to call, the satanic twins or whatever, because they give money to conservative causes. You don't know any. Okay, never mind. How am I supposed to make a connection? Well, now you know some names: George Soros and the Koch brothers. Anyway, these two guys, Arthur and Lewis Tappan, lots of money given to abolitionist causes. Their big method, their main method of raising awareness was by just sending all sorts of pieces of literature. It was basically as far as I know, the first junk mail campaign. You just send stuff to people. They don't ask for you to send it to them. You just send it to them unsolicited, and just flooded the country with it, and of course flooded Congress with it. And so the federal post office was being used to make this political and humanitarian statement. And one of the things that they argue for, and this is why they're considered radical, is this right here. They don't believe in gradual compensated emancipation. They believe in immediate emancipation. Now, all slaves now should be freed. Universal means all, not just like the children, but also the parents. And I should put in here uncompensated, because they believe, why should you get money from any form of government because you used to own a human being? No, thank you. That's immoral. And so, when they were founded in 1833, this was a big step towards ratcheting up the tension and the arguments and the rhetoric in the war over slavery. So William Lloyd Garrison himself, I would call him the most radical abolitionist. I do want to show you a primary source of him when we're done with these notes, which will probably, well, almost certainly be tomorrow. Very uncompromising. And he's looking back to the Second Great Awakening, using the language of the Second Great Awakening preachers. He's an extremely religious person, and he's calling slavery not just immoral, he's calling it a sin. That slavery is sinful. That slavery will keep you out of heaven if you own a slave. You will be sent to hell, kind of thing. It's very much part of the Jackson era because it's about emotionalism. He's not appealing to your reason, he's appealing to your base instincts. And he's a pacifist. He would not raise a hand to defend himself if he was beaten or dragged through the streets, which he was. But he also thought, even though he himself wouldn't do the shooting, he thought that the only way we're going to get rid of slavery if there's some kind of terribly bloody war. And some historians might even argue that that was his goal, was to anger Southerners so much that they wanted to retaliate, and then the North would win and get rid of slavery. That's how some people view his actions. William Lloyd Garrison, the most radical abolitionist of this era. Oh, and you know what? He believed in true female equality. Racial and gender equality. Imagine that. That's a rare combination in this time if you're a man, if you're a white man. Okay, you good there? Because I want to head on to the next one. Are you still writing down every word? It looks like it. Oh my goodness. Anybody know what his publication was called? How'd you know that? Because it's the next term on the outline, right? So he used the press. He had a newspaper, and in 1830 he was sent to jail because he was accused of libeling a slave trader. If you don't know what libel is, it's basically lying about somebody in print. Slander is lying out loud, verbally. Libel is when you do it in print. And he actually, I shouldn't say he had his own newspaper at that point. That was when he was writing for a different newspaper. So when he got out of jail in 1831, a little while after that, he decided to start his own newspaper, and it was called The Liberator, and it was as radical as he was. And the thing with The Liberator was, it wasn't just for northern elites in the cities. It wasn't just for Bostonians and the transcendentalists. It was also sent to the Circlevilles and the Lancasters and the Chillicoths and the Muncie Indianas and the Springfield, Illinois, the Midwestern farming communities as well, using the post office. In it, he used the Liberator often to not only call slave owners sinners, evil, but he also said the American Union is cursed by God as long as we are in union with slave owning states. Something he said quite often. the Constitution. Now you got to understand, like in today's political atmosphere, we have people talking about the Constitution being almost like, and the Declaration of Independence almost being like American scripture. Right? There are some parts of our country that want elevated up in the world, like especially a lot of the religious people. You'll find I've seen a lot of religious services where I hear more people in church saying "Amen" when somebody talks about the Constitution than when somebody talks about Jesus saving them of their sins. Right? Like there's just elevation of in some parts of our country that the Constitution, the Declaration, the founding documents are just like the bee's knees, right? And this religious man is the exact opposite of that. He is saying the Constitution is a covenant with death and an agreement with hell because it has compromises that allow slavery in it. He would literally take copies of the Constitution in public and burn it to show his displeasure. Radical dude. What about some of the ladies? We've got to talk about the Grimke sisters. Their dad owned a southern plantation. He owned slaves. So technically, I guess they owned slaves. Their family did. Sarah and Angelina Grimke got converted to Quakerism. Tried to persuade their parents to free their slaves. Didn't work. And so they left. They went out on their own. And they took up the cause of abolition. Educated, wealthy sisters. Now, they did a lot for women's rights too. But the main place they started was abolitionism. You know what? I need to show you a picture of William Lloyd Garrison, and I need to show you a picture of the Grimke sisters because I don't have them on here, and I should have them on here, right? Okay, so let's look real quick. So you can put a face with the name. William. When you think of William Lloyd Garrison, how I have described him, what's the image in your head that you get? How would you describe him in your mind? Like this?
A little bit worse. Oh, no. Maybe a mustache handlebar specifically.
Oh. Whoa. He does look like a William.
Is there a William look? Yep. When I think of William Lloyd Garrison, I think of him like as a smaller man, small glasses, bald, not frail, but you know the power. His power didn't come from his physical strength or stature. It came from his words and on the written page. Now, Sarah and not Angelica, Angelina. Oh. What do you mean, oh? What? What are you laughing at?
Young ladies. No, I did too. Like, I thought they'd be like in their 20s, probably 45.
They are. They are. I think that's them in their prime.
Like, oh, if that's their prime, I need to see them out of it.
This is the picture that people.
I gotta write that down. The Grimke sisters make me feel better about myself.
Oh, that's so mean. Here, that's better. See?
I put it in the notes, guys. I'm doing it.
That's
They might need to take up a big profession.
Emily. Don't pay attention to these people.
Oh.
So it's on the screen.
Look at the screen.
Well, I don't know about you, but I don't measure somebody's worth based on their looks. I don't.
I'm not saying they're worthless. We're just saying it's funny. They can be great human beings.
And they were.
And they were.
And they were.
And they were, exactly.
They were.
They did great things.
Homely might be a good way to describe them. I've heard it said before by one of the people who helped me become a better history teacher. He said, "Find me a woman who's uglier than Eleanor Roosevelt in American history." No.
No, we need to pull a picture. All you can think of is Teddy with his little glasses.
I'll spare you that.
And you add her to the list.
All right, fine. Eleanor Roosevelt. Here we come. Great person, wonderful person.
I'm so excited. Here we go. Where is she? She's not ugly, Mr. Beavers. She just looks old.
No, she believed that she was ugly, and she felt that she was always. It was like a huge blow to her when she found out that Franklin Roosevelt was sleeping around, right? Because she felt like all of the women that he was going after were better looking than her, and that she could never, yeah,
She
right.
looks like she would be married to, she's married to FDR. She looks like she would be married to FDR. Yeah, they're good.
Yeah, you all made fun of the cross-eyed preacher. Now you're making fun of the